Have y'all heard of the Bigfoot that is supposedly buried in Cracker Neck, which is in Big Stone Gap, Virginia? Well, this story right here, y'all, is supposedly true and happened a long time ago. Josh Cracker was originally from North Carolina. He was known to be a long distance trapper and hunter and fur trader. He came down to Big Stone Gap because he knew the animals there were plentiful and he would stay the winter, get an abundance of furs, and process them, take them back to North Carolina to sell after winter was over. One year, Josh decided that he wanted to teach his son how to become a fur trader and teach him this trade. So, he brought his son from North Carolina out to the woods of Big Stone Gap. They immediately started working on just a rinky dink cabin. During the day, they would go out trapping, bring the furs back, and they'd process them there and tan them and do everything you got to do to make a good fur hide. Then one evening, things started getting kind of weird. You see, Josh and his son were in the cabin, and the nighttime had settled in pretty good. Now, up in these mountains, you're used to all kinds of sounds. You're used to bobcats screaming. You're used to the coyotes howling. You're used to the birds making odd noises in the middle of the night. But what you aren't used to is a growling, ape-like sound roaming and growing through the woods. And these howls and growls were so loud that they were just echoing around the mountain around them. And they couldn't figure out what it was. They went outside to look, there was nothing there. They came back in and decided to settle in for the night, and soon all the noises just came to a stop when the sun came up. The next morning, they got up and they packed all the supplies that they were going to need for the day to go out trapping. By the time they got back that evening, the door of their cabin was wide open, and they walked in. Everything was in a disarray. The meat that they had hanging on the hooks in there was gone. Even the processed meats, all of it was gone. Some of their furs were in there, and they were ripped up to shreds. They had no clue what could have done this, but they knew what they were going to do to make sure it didn't happen again. They decided that someone was going to have to be there at all times to guard that cabin from whatever predator it was that broke in. So one morning, Josh went out. The next morning, the sun would go out, and they would take turns back and forth, and this would proceed for a couple weeks. Spring was coming, and it was coming pretty fast, and Josh decided that they had an abundance of furs to bring back and meat, and that they were going to pack it up and head out the next morning. So they started packing up, had everything just about ready to go. They slept well that night. They hadn't heard a peep out of that crazy thing in the woods for a while. They got up, and Josh said, "You know what, son? Go out there and get us some squirrel. That would be great. Get us some squirrel, and then we'll have us a good breakfast before we leave, and then we'll head out." So his son went out into the woods, and he brought back a heap of squirrel. But when he came back to a scene that he'll never forget. Running past him by the cabin was a giant, hairy, naked man. And this thing was carrying something. And the son couldn't figure out what he was carrying. He kept looking and looking. And then he realized that it was carrying his dad's head, Josh's head, as it was running. And it was dropping things behind it. And it was hauling butt through the woods. Well, the son was so upset, he picked up his you-know-what, and he went to after it, and one got the monster right in its back and dropped him on his face. The son was so upset, he went over there to see if it was really you-know-what left, and he got to look into seeing what all the stuff that monster has done, that hairy man had done, and he had been dropping pieces of big old Daddy Cracker the whole way. It was just legs and arms and toes and fingers. Parts of Josh Cracker just laying there. The son was so upset. Well, he grabbed every piece of his father that he could, and he buried him near that cabin in a grave with a marker. Best marker he could possibly make to be out in the woods them days. A couple rocks and such, and then he said, "Well, I can't leave the hairy man here," so he decided he was going to bury him too. And it got late into the evening, so the son decided to stay one more night. And that's what he did. That night was something awful. He said there were screams and howls and knockings and all kinds of crazy noises thrashing outside the cabin. He wasn't about to go out there and end up like his daddy. So he just tuckered in and stayed put. Next morning, when the sun came up, the noises just dissipated. He knew it was safe to go outside then. He gathered what he could, put back in the wagon, went and checked on his daddy's grave, which was still there and in good condition. Then he decided to go check on where he buried that hairy man. When he walked up on the hairy man's grave, the hairy man was gone, supposedly. He reckoned that the family of that hairy man came back and took his body and buried him elsewhere. Or maybe they just didn't bury him at all. Maybe the son didn't want anybody to know where he had buried that awful thing. Settlers came in and found the remnants of the cabin that they had built. And they decided to name that place after something they heard that young Mr. Cracker say. He said that his father had risked his neck to go out in them woods to get them hides. And they decided to name this area Cracker Neck because of that. If you enjoyed this story and have anything similar you'd like to tell me, let me know in the comments. And y'all don't forget to follow me for more paranormal stories.